So the question about trade is, what do you do about the negative consequences of trade, if anything? So this is a huge argument in the economy, and one of the, it used to be a big point of difference between Democrats and Republicans, but we've seen free trading Democrats like Bill Clinton and Republicans that have come in increasing tariffs and other trade protections, George W. Bush, for example, on steel and softwood lumber, etc. So it's not always on party lines. Nevertheless, it's a big argument. What do you do, if anything, about people who've lost their jobs due to an increase in trade, reduction of tariffs? So let's think about that. One knee-jerk reaction is to say, "Oh, somebody's been hurt by trade. A steel worker lost his job. Whatever." You hear it. Outsourcing. People lost their jobs. Oh, we should ban trade. We should impose trade barriers. Well, one thing is I couldn't resist this cartoon with cars, especially. It's hard to tell what's American. BMWs and Mercedes and Hyundais and Hondas and Toyotas are often built in the U.S., whereas the Fords and some of the GM cars and I suppose the Chryslers too are made in Mexico or Canada, so it's hard to tell. But one reaction is to say, "Oh, we should put tariffs up." Well, there's some problems with that, and maybe it's the right thing to do, but the gains from trade are lost when you impose tariffs. So the size of the economic pie is smaller, and that's a real loss to the economy. Also, you try to help one group of people in the economy by imposing trade barriers. Well, you hurt another part of the economy. We're going to do a case on solar panels, and it happens that Solar World, solar panel maker, is right here in Hillsborough, so it hits close to home. But if we protect Solar World, it means solar panels are going to be more expensive, and then there's a lot of solar panel installers, companies that are hurt because now their inputs are more expensive, and a lot of homeowners that might convert to solar. If it's inexpensive, now it's expensive, and it's either going to cost them more or they're going to stick with what they've got. And so there's a environmental issue there too. So it's not always so simple, and very often imposing trade barriers is not a very good option. So what do you do else? One camp would have you redistribute. Okay, we know that through trade, the winners win more than the losers lose. At present, we really don't have any mechanism to transfer those gains from the winners to the losers. So we could do that. We could tax the rich and pay money to the poor, especially the poor that are shown to have lost their jobs to become poor due to trade agreements, and that's been tried, and that idea certainly might have some merit as well. However, there are some problems there. One is redistributing, taxing some people and supporting others. It can really have negative consequences for people's incentive to work and the size of the pie. On the side of the rich, some argue that the rich aren't going to work as hard. Their incentive to work is reduced if taxes are high, and that's certainly true at some level. If you've got a marginal tax rate of 40%, well, that means if I earn an extra $1, I only get to keep 60 cents of it. But I'm not sure that's where the biggest part of the problem is we see all over the economy. Bill Gates is still working. I guess he's stepped back a little bit and doing charity work, but we see people that are making billions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars a year, and they're still working. So there's something else driving that. Not to say that's not an important effect, but it's it's probably on the other end. What if you lost your job due to a trade agreement, and now you got a check coming in the mail? This is the way they did it with NAFTA. All you had to do was show you had lost your job due to your companies moving jobs to Mexico, and you were entitled for quite a payout. Well, that payout is coming in. Your incentive to go find a new job is pretty small, and that's a lot of idle resources, and that's waste. So that direct payments to poor, it's not a great way to encourage the poor people to work, and this is pretty big problem with that approach. Another approach that has been it has been argued that the United States has succeeded in this approach, and certainly in some eras that's, I think, quite true. But one argument is, look, don't try to intervene. Don't try to go help the people that lost their jobs and pass legislation to protect them. Create a labor market and an economy where if people lose their jobs, it's really easy to find other jobs. And that used to work almost economy-wide in the United States, but in our current economy, and this predates the Great Recession, if you had high skills, you're pretty easy to land on your feet. My brother's a software programmer, and people are constantly moving. One startup goes bust, they find 10 offers, the next week. But for the common man, it is very difficult if you're a relatively low-skilled worker to lose a job in one sector and find employment in another sector. And this is especially true once you're my age, mid-50s. You're just old enough where it probably isn't going to make sense for a company to put a lot of resources into retraining you. The U.S. though has historically had a much smaller intervention into labor markets. In Europe and Latin America, you see laws that, protect workers from being laid off. You lay off a worker. If a company lays off a worker, you have to pay them for a whole year. These extreme policies. The problem with that is that if that's what you have to do when you've hired a worker, companies are going to be real careful about hiring workers, and they're not going to hire workers as much under that kind of a legal system. So the U.S. has had a much more open labor market, and there has been a lot more success in past decades, especially in placing people that have lost their jobs. And we may yet return to that, but there's a good argument to be made that isn't working as well as it used to. But anyway, that's one position in this argument. Another argument about trade, and Paul Krugman, who's an international economist and a fairly liberal political and economic commentator, writes for the New York Times. He's argued, and he's a pro-trade guy, by the way, but he's argued that, hey, look, we can't have people that lose their jobs because of trade agreements. We can't have them immiserated to the extent that they are now. This system that we have today is not working for poor people. And he's argued that what the country should do is to have public amenities that are granted to all citizens, whether they're rich or poor, and those public amenities are not lost when you lose your job. So he certainly he would point to the European systems where high quality education is free, not just at the grammar school level, but at high school and college level too. That's a public amenity. So if you lose your job, you don't lose your ability to send your kids to a good school and give them a future hope. Also, healthcare. The U.S. is just about alone, and now with some changes, some reforms, there's a lot more help for people that can't afford health care. But the U.S. is almost alone maybe alone in having a privatized health care system. And Obamacare didn't much change that, unless you were you're very poor. For most of us, though, that didn't affect us. The fact, and then I guess Obamacare did reduce the pain of losing the health care provided through work, but historically in the U.S., if you lost your job because of for whatever reason, you often lost health care and then got ill, and the number one cause of personal bankruptcy has been health care for some time. Has been illness, and if you had a public socialized healthcare system, you lose your job. Well, okay, you don't lose health care. That's a amenity that it is independent. Having that is independent of your wealth or income status. And that's been argued that if we had such policies in place, the pain of losing a job, the ability to keep your health and other aspects of your well-being until you found your next job would be preserved. And indeed, offering these public amenities wouldn't have the same problem as other redistributive policies, because they're available to everybody. They're not, you're not getting a paycheck in the mail. You're not getting, I guess I'll leave it at that. You don't sit at home getting paid. You just have some public amenities that you have access to, and you can send your kids to school, not get sick, etc., or not get treatment when you're sick, even if you're out of work.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.